Okay, we're ready whenever you
I'm going to give Aisha just a few more seconds. We'll begin.
are. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think out of respect for people who were, I always try to be respectful that people's time is precious. We're all volunteers and everybody's here on time. Oh, there we are. Great. Hey, Aisha, nice to see you. I think you were here a minute ago. There you are. Hi. Okay, let's get going. Am I good to go, Brian?
Yes, you're good to go.
Okay. So, welcome to the May 23rd, 2023 meeting of the CB6 Youth and Education Committee. My name is John Keller. I'm chair of the committee. Tonight, we are joined by District Manager Jesus Perez and Community Coordinator Brian Lafferty. This meeting is called to order at 6:35 p.m. And as a reminder, New York State law now requires all community board members to have their cameras on and their first and last names displayed from the time the meeting is called to order until the time the meeting is adjourned. If your camera is not on and your name not properly displayed, you cannot count towards quorum. And I see we have several members of the public present here. You can raise any questions or comments you have through the Q&A feature of Zoom. If there is time following the committee's discussion, we'll field questions from the public, and as people know, I'll always find time for that. Aisha Siddiqui is going to be is kind enough to volunteer to take minutes for tonight's meeting. Thank you, Aisha. I appreciate that. And you should all have received an email from the board office with a link to a Doodle sign-up sheet for minute takers at this meeting. And for your convenience, the link to the sign-up sheet will be posted in the chat this evening, even if this is our last formal meeting of the year. So first of all, we'd like to take attendance by roll call, and Brian will conduct the roll.
Committee members, I will call your name and you will unmute yourselves. When your name is called, please say present. I will announce if there is quorum. Neil Barclay.
Present.
Thank you. Jonathan D'Erico is excused.
Yes, Jonathan's excused.
Stuart Desser.
Present.
Thank you. John Keller.
Present.
Thank you. Abigail Kruzmark.
Present.
Thank you. Aisha Siddiqui.
Present.
Thank you. Matthew Weintraub.
Present.
Thank you. With 6 of 7 members, we have 4.
Thank you. The agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office and appears on the screen before you. If there's no objection, we'll adopt the agenda as stated. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting the agenda, you may raise your hand through Zoom. See everyone, very good. Seeing no objections, the agenda for tonight's meeting is adopted. The minutes from the March 28th committee meeting were distributed ahead of time by the board office. If there is no objection, we will adopt the minutes as drafted. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting the minutes as drafted, you may raise your hand through Zoom. And thank you, Abby, for doing the minutes. Seeing no objections, the minutes from the March 28th committee meeting are adopted and will soon be available on the CB6 website. In order to conduct an efficient meeting, let's observe a few ground rules. No one may speak until granted the floor. Committee members, if you have a question about committee business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand through Zoom. And we all should always note that the chat function should not be used for committee business or questions about agenda topics. All such remarks should be made on the record by raising your hand through Zoom. Chat should only be used to alert us to any technical difficulties you're having, or to state in writing information like an email address that was already stated aloud on the record during the meeting. And when a committee member is given the floor to speak, I'll identify you. You can unmute yourself so you can speak. We tend to be fairly casual about that, but let's try to follow it up. Okay, so the order, we'll follow the order of the adopted agenda. And the first item of the agenda, and Brian, can we pull the resolution up? There's a resolution supporting the marijuana and murder enforcement legislation as agreed upon among the governor and legislative leaders in Albany. And the focus of the resolution, and I'll give you a little bit of a background on why this resolution was prepared in this way. There's been a history recently, as part of the budget process about this that many of you are familiar with, that there were many concerns raised about how MRTA, the Marijuana Taxation, Legalization and Taxation Act, should be enforced. And there was a bill actually passed as long ago as last March of last year, which was put forward by Senator Krueger and Senator Hoylman Siegel, that passed the state Senate, but was arrived a little late to be part of the discussion in Albany with the Assembly, so it got pushed off to this year, and then became part of a broader negotiation between the governor's office and the state assembly and legislature. So the enabling legislation was finally it came to pass through as a result of the budget process. And there was a meeting. I was invited to the borough board meeting last week where the Office of Cannabis Management made a presentation on this regard, a copy of which we've been promised but are still awaiting, which goes into some detail on a lot of the matters here. So the point of this resolution is to acknowledge what's happened, that there's enforced enhancement authority to the Office of Cannabis Management. There's the forced enhancement authority to the Department of Tax and Finance. And that all of these things are significant because up until this enabling legislation was passed, OCM really technically could only go into licensed establishments. Now it is, and now OCM can go into unlicensed establishments. But until this was passed, this was being done in the city by the sheriff's office and the district attorney. And then there were a lot of objections raised to that, which I can go into if you want me to. So now there is enforcement legislation with teeth that has been the product of much discussion and long debate. And some people are happy with the enforcement legislation. Some people are unhappy with the enforcement legislation. I felt it was not useful, and discussions with others came to the conclusion that it was not useful to relitigate and rediscuss what should or should not have been in the enforcement legislation that took several months for the governor, the assembly, and the Senate to arrive at a consensus on. So the resolve here is that is aimed directly at our state assembly members and state senators, asking them to impress on the Office of Cannabis Management and the Department of Tax and Finance the urgency of the concerns of CD6 constituents related to the illicit sales of cannabis in their neighborhoods. And this has been brought up quite often at our committee meetings by residents of Community District 6. And the resolve is that we are going to ask the Office of Cannabis Management, when it reports on this, first to begin reporting earlier than they say they'll report. Their initial report, it was for January 1st, 2024, which is 7 months from now. And I've said openly to people that if we wait until January 1st to have our first report, there won't be 1,700 illicit stores in Manhattan. There'll be over 2,000 by then. But so we're asking the Office of Cannabis Management, in the interest of transparency, to begin reporting on a monthly basis. And we're asking for them to start in October, related to businesses illicitly selling cannabis in Community District 6. And we're asking them to report the number of businesses engaged in these activities, the number of administrative inspections of these businesses in the prior 30 days before the date of the report, the penalties and fines imposed on such businesses in the prior 30 days, and how many businesses they've actually closed in the prior 30 days, and the number of commercial landlords that have begun or completed eviction proceedings of businesses in the prior 30 days. So this is just a very practical resolution asking the Office of Cannabis Management not to change its regulations, not asking the Assembly rather, or the Senate or the governor to make any changes to what they fought over or discussed, I guess would be the polite way of putting it, for several months, but simply to report so that we can get a sense of how this is working. And that is the resolve of this resolution, recognizing the concern of so many people expressed by so many members of Community District 6. So I'm going to open that to questions at this point before we begin to address it. Yeah, Stuart.
I don't have any objection to the resolve clause at all, and most of this seems fine. I just want to ask, I mean, this is about OCM enforcement, and that's good. I'm a little concerned that that the budget creates, as you say in the second whereas, a Class A misdemeanor for selling pot without a license. And I don't know if that's relevant to this discussion. It probably isn't, but you know, that can return us to the bad old days when police could then selectively arrest people, not necessarily on valid charges. So I wonder if that's something that has any bearing here or none at all.
I think that's a very good question, and I'm going to be completely candid that I included this. Keith Powers put out his own release on this and included a mention of the Class A misdemeanor. And I frankly, for that one phrase, used his own phraseology there. I think the resolution works just fine without that being in, without that whereas being in it. So if there was a consensus that that's an issue with the reso, then I'm open to changing the whereas. However, it is part of the legislation, and the concerns that both sides had concerns on this regarding how the concern, the reason there was a holdback on a lot of this was that there was a concern that people would be unduly targeted or unfairly targeted, and that's there. But the authority right now is with the Office of Cannabis Management and the Department of Taxation and Finance. The Sheriff's Office has been taking enforcement actions, but the Sheriff's Office is only permitted to go into shops that already sell alcohol and are already licensed to sell alcohol and tobacco. And there was some concern expressed that going into those shops and looking for marijuana was, according to some, a warrantless search. So yes, all of these concerns have been raised, which is why it's taken so long to get to the point that we have anything here at all.
Well,
I'm open to further discussion.
I think that whereas clause is probably a necessary antecedent to the resolved, so I don't think I would object to it, because we're not talking about police enforcement. So I think that's okay.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, let's leave it in then. But the reason this took so long, Stuart's point is very well made, that the reason this took so long to get even this far it was because there are genuine concerns about how the enforcement is done. And as you said, the bad old days where nobody wants to go back to them. The point that and I'm watching, if anybody else puts their hand up, I'll stop talking and recognize them. But the point that I make now is that legal shops, illicit shops, are less than 1% in New York City of the 1,700 illicit shops. And as I said at Borough Board when I was permitted to speak, that you don't need a PhD in business strategy to know that that is not a tenable strategic position to be in. So we need to start approving through BALC, and that's why Claire and her committee is so concerned about this. We need to start approving as many legal shops as we can so we can start to get a critical mass of legal shops in the marketplace. And then we need to see how the enforcement is done. So I'll be silent and see if there are any other questions or comments. Abby.
On the final whereas, is it possible that we could do a youth or schools tie-in, such as concerns expressed by the residents of CD6, like including school principals, community centers that serve youth? I mean, I don't know exactly.
Yeah, well, whereas above it, it has, especially as those sales are targeted at minors.
Oh, okay, I didn't see that one.
Yeah, so if without getting into specific people who raised it, I just thought the fact that we did address the concern of targeting at minors in the whereas before. Does that meet what you're concerned about, Abby?
Yeah, I was just looking to make it tie in more to our committee, but I think that's sufficient.
Any other comments? Okay, I'm since I'm chair, I cannot. And first of all, I'll ask Brian and Jesus, are there any members of the public who have indicated a desire to speak on this matter by raising their hands?
None of the attendees have raised their hand.
All right, so I'm going to add okay, so since no one we've sought whether there is comment from the public, we've sought comment from the committee. I as chair cannot make a motion, so if someone wishes to make a motion to pass this resolution, that would be useful.
Well, and I move the question.
Okay, and is there a second?
second,
So we have Stuart has moved the question, Neil has seconded it. And I think, Ryan, why don't we do a roll call vote on this, because it is an important result.
We'll now take a vote on the resolution supporting MRTA enforcement legislation as agreed among the governor and legislative leaders in Albany, and requesting that state and city officials update community boards and council members on the status of enforcement, including the number of shops operating illegally in their respective community board and council districts, and the number of shops that have been closed as a result of enforcement. When your name is called for your vote, you can unmute yourself and answer in favor, opposed, abstain, or not entitled. Neil Barclay.
favor,
Thank you. Jonathan DeErico is excused. Stuart Desser.
In favor.
Thank you. John Keller.
In favor.
Thank you. Abigail Cruzmar.
In favor.
Thank you. Aisha Siddiqui.
In favor.
Thank you. Matthew Weintraub.
I've got some comments on it before I give my vote. I think in general, I think this is an important thing to address in the community. Like, I work in a school where drug abuse is not uncommon. But for me, it raises some questions like how much funding is going to have to go into making this happen. And like, I'm going to be completely honest. We have so many, like how many people know how many social workers are at each school in our district, or counselors?
First of all, I don't want to, first of all, that's
No.
an important
It's like a
question, but I
hypothetical.
need we can continue discussion after the vote. I don't know if we had a,
Can I finish, please?
sure, go ahead.
And again, like, this is an important issue, but I think it's, for me personally as an educator, it's been incredibly frustrating. I feel a little, like, honestly disgusted. I'm just being honest at like how much airspace this has taken up when there's like such a serious mental health crisis going on amongst our youth. So I'm in favor of this resolution, but I think we're looking at the wrong things. And I have to say that on the record.
And so your vote is in favor, because I would like to comment on that at length, but let's finish the vote. But is your vote in favor? Or just
It is
so
in
Brian-
favor. Yes,
Okay.
it is in favor.
Thank you. With 6 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstaining, and 0 abstaining for cause or not entitled, the motion passes.
And then I would like to address, Matthew's point, and one of the things that I was going to reserve for my chair's report section. Can I address Matthew's point and points that others have raised during my chair report? So we stick to we could very briefly move through the other items on the agenda, because I very much want to get at the questions that Matthew was raising, and I know. So let me, if Matthew, if you could wait till so we just don't have to rearrange the agenda. let me continue. All right, and then I'll get to it because I understand that concern. The second item on the agenda is continued discussion of alternate sightings for New York City Department of Education school facilities. And we actually did, this is I tend to, when someone tells me I can't do something, I tend to keep trying to do it. And I still think this is a good idea. But it's going to take a lot of work. I've engaged with Sandy McKee, who's been very open on this, chair of our land use committee. And she was actually in a discussion with Dan Garodnik, who's now the head of city planning on this, and in a public meeting. And there are going to be relatively few conversions of office buildings to housing. But that doesn't mean that we have to stop thinking about how we can get schools into those spaces. We might just have to be a little more creative about how we incent developers to incorporate schools or any community facilities into these spaces. And I think I've raised before the example of the footprint that is now occupied by the High School of Art and Design, PS 59, and the District 75 school, along with a nice condominium and affordable housing and a Whole Foods. So I think we have to be very much more creative about how these things are done. And I would like to if there is a continued interest in pursuing this next year, I would like to keep pushing on this subject, because I think when Matt raised this originally, I think this is something that is worth pushing on. And when I get to my chair's report, I'm going to ask for people to talk about issues such as Matt just started to talk about, that they would like us to be focusing on and addressing next year. So that's basically what I want to say on the school facilities point. But since it's on the agenda, I'd like to invite any other comments on it at this point, or we can hold it to the broader discussion. Yes, Stuart.
Well, I'd like to better understand the logic. We have city-owned facilities that are occupied. If they're not overcrowded, and perhaps they are, they seem the best design for an educational facility. They're located essentially where they need to be. And, you know, these are in many cases actually wonderful buildings that need to be maintained. They have gyms, they have cafeterias, you know, so what's the logic of taking schools out of the existing physical facility and renting office space that's not configured for them? Why do we want to do that?
I'll address that briefly and then turn it to Matt, who made points when he first raised this. But I think a lot of the question here is the condition of some of these buildings. And Matt, I'm going to let you make your point, and then I'll say what I think.
There are a few different ways to think about it. First is I invite any of you to come into my building and tell me it is, well kept. So unless we are going to actually maintain the building, then I don't think that is an accurate point. I think another thing to think about is, even if there are not schools in our district necessarily that need a new building, there might be schools in other districts that are run down that could potentially use CB6 office space for a school. So that's just another point, which could also increase like foot traffic in the neighborhoods and, contribute to economy, things like that. I think that there's also the state bill that was mandated to reduce class sizes. If you're going to reduce class sizes, you need to spread classes out, which might require smaller classes, which means more rooms. So again, there'd have to be some math done with that. Then I think, there's this whole, I think this thing has come up, at least with shared campuses, inter-school conflict. It makes it a lot harder to manage a school when you have 5-6 schools in a building and you don't know like you see kids in the school in a hallway, you have no idea which school they belong to. They can be causing all sorts of disruptions. And again, like those are just some reasons, like just off the top of my head.
I'm going to give Stuart a chance to respond to that and then make a suggestion as to how to proceed. And anyone else who wants to comment, but Stuart is comment.
So I think the first question is, if there's a maintenance problem in our buildings, shouldn't the money, instead of being paid to rent to private entities, shouldn't that money be invested instead in maintaining our buildings? If we reduce class size, do we have additional teachers that can occupy this space? And I would also appreciate if you'd explain to me, I understand that this is an issue, but I don't understand why it's an issue that students from one school should not walk down the hallway into the territory of another school. So if you could explain, if you could answer those three questions, I think.
I'm going to, since you're asking Matt the question, I'm going to let Matt answer it, and then I'll give my experience, and then let's take a view on how we can move ahead.
I mean, it depends again how you want to approach the question. You can approach the question from a rules and regulations standpoint, where technically students are trespassing. Oftentimes, if off of the rules and regulation aspect, students might have conflict with one another, and they literally go to find one another to fight them. We've had instances of students pushing into classrooms in schools that they do not belong in. And that creates a very dangerous situation because there's no immediate staff member that knows that child to de-escalate the situation. And that can create dangerous situations, which I have literally witnessed. Again, just literally keeping track of students, right? Like while they are in the school building, the city, we are legally liable for those young people. And if, we can't keep them accounted for, if we do not know who they are, it makes it a lot harder to manage where students should be. Because there's no inter-school communication system. There's no way to access a roster from law, school, and diplomacy for me to see who this potential student is, so some basic stuff.
Abby?
I don't have any direct experience on the subject, but it does seem like this is a really nuanced topic where it's going to draw on a lot of different aspects. Like even I'm thinking about the school construction authority and like procurement and how being in a rented space would affect all that. But I think like when it comes down to it, it does seem like there is a need, whether it's a new school or like flex space or like a pilot program. It does seem like the city would have a need for extra space. So I think, if the DOE agrees with that need and, we could raise it as a board, as a possibility. But I think I would support that, but I do think we could get more specific about the schools in our district who have that need and how the need would be met by office space.
I'm going to give Stuart a chance to respond here and then make a suggestion to cut off the discussion if everyone agrees, but I would give Stuart a chance to respond.
I thought Abby made good points, but I would still like to understand. I don't want to abandon our city-owned buildings, because if they're not well maintained, then I think we should put the money into maintaining them. Otherwise, we lose some infrastructure that we own to pay to a private entity. And again, the class size question, we're not going to reduce class sizes by enlarging the physical space if we don't have additional teachers. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I see Matthew smiling, and I'm going to just make a couple comments, and then if we push this to a further discussion next year. But this is a very the whole class size issue, I think the mayor himself has been addressing this, and the chancellor have been raising questions about, do we have enough teachers? Are we gonna have enough room? These are big issues that have to be talked about. And my thinking on this has always been very outside the box, where, you know, if you think about the current, how we fund schools currently in an environment of declining enrollment, with more classrooms and more teachers, that gets harder and harder to sustain and think about. So the question here is, are there truly creative ways of dealing with this? And the way they dealt with it at the site of PS 59 and High School of Arts and Sciences, it was the High School of Art and Design was basically the DOE sold a large footprint to a private developer, and on the condition that the developer put the schools in and leased them to the city for 99 years. And infusion of cash to the city. Now, but those are very rare circumstances where you're actually going to be able to replicate something like that. So, you know, but this gets very quickly to broader questions of how schools are funded. You know, we get quickly into the weeds of fair student funding. We get into all sorts of other issues when we get into this. And I would like to put this in the area of my chair's report as a subject. If we wish to, you know, get into it next year, we would actually have to have people who want to run with the subject. And because there's just a lot of legwork that has to get done. In addition, you know, we would have to collaborate with, you know, the Department of Education, with community education councils, with all sorts of other groups, and not to mention the UFT and the mayor's office, you know, as we go through this. So, unless there is something that, I mean, I think Abby's made very good points. Stuart has made very good points. I mean, this is an issue that, you know, it's fraught. You know, I mean, the whole issue of reducing class sizes. You know, I remember once when one of my kids was in a class of 35 kids, and he was talking to a friend of his who went to a independent school with 15 kids in the class, and he couldn't get his head around being in a classroom with just 15 kids. You know, so there are just an incredible number of issues that come in here. So I would like to move this to the towards the end of the meeting, to when we discuss things that we as a committee want to look at next year, and see if someone wants to run with this. And so unless there's another comment, I'll cut off discussion on this right now, but it's a fraught issue and not easy to address. So the third item is, this is brief because I was hoping to have Rich Mintz here tonight from the homeless and housing committee, and he was unable to be here. I know Abby is vice chair of that committee. It seems to me that this is an issue that is going to become more and more important as we move ahead. And I would like to reach out to Rich and the Housing and Homeless Committee to put this issue on our agenda next year, because I think there's several schools in our district are affected by this. This is a very practical issue that affects parents and guardians and members of the community district 6 directly. So this is an issue I would like to continue discussing, but I'll leave it open right now to Abby, if there's any comment you would like to make on this, or I'd welcome that.
Sure. So I think what we're talking about is immigrant children in CD6 schools. Broadly, the city has welcomed about 60,000 asylum seekers. And I think, John, in your census that you pulled, roughly 300 of them are in schools in our district. So On the Housing and Homelessness Committee, actually next month, we're planning a resolution on emergency shelter for asylum seekers. But I do think there is opportunity for collaboration between our two committees. Whether or not these children ultimately live in our district, they are going to school here. Their services needs are probably great. ESL needs are probably great. So yeah, I don't know quite what the form of that collaboration would look like, but I think this is certainly an issue that is not going away anytime soon. But I would also say this is an issue that the city has dealt with before. In 2014, there was a significant and accompanied minors crisis, and we saw significant numbers of minors in our schools, enrolling in schools, coming to our city alone. That's not as much the case today. I haven't heard so much about minors coming accompanied. I'm sure there are some, but that doesn't seem to be the heart of the challenge. But I do think this is worth exploration by our two committees, and I'm happy to help, bridge the communication between our committees.
Good, and I'll reach out to Rich. When is your next meeting, Abby? Do you know the date? It's okay.
So it was originally June 19th, but that's a federal holiday, so I believe it's being moved to the 7th. But Jesus can correct me.
We are polling the committee to see if we can move it to the 7th. You've already replied, but there are a few members who have not. So Brian is on that, trying to get wrangle enough members so that it can be quorum. If there is quorum, it'll be on the 7th. If there's not, we'll reassess.
Okay, so if there is quorum and you have a meeting, I will be the 7th. It's not the 8th, because I know Health and Humans and the Health Committee is also meeting on the 8th. So as long as it's the 7th, I'll try to be there at that meeting. Okay, and see where we go with this. And I'll be in touch with Rich again. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the chair's report, and I noticed that we're running up 7:15, but I would like to take a few minutes here. And I wanted to start by saying, Matt made a very good point about we've spent a lot of energy on the cannabis issue, and that was pressed by events. And hopefully we can now get into monitoring how this is moving ahead. And the only reason this committee became involved in it was that it's directly involves kids, and was brought to our attention by parents from a school, not a public school, but a very well-known and well-regarded religious private school. And it's clearly on the minds of parents. So we've pursued it, and it's taken a lot of time and energy, and it's become a bit of a political hot button topic. But I think that's a long, short way of saying that I would like to focus. I think I didn't do a great job of engaging many of you, several of you who have issues that I know are of importance to you in the past year. So I would like to look ahead to next year and identify a set of issues that we can move ahead with on this committee, and that people will be willing to run with, because there's a lot of work, as we've discovered on the facilities issue. It's not these issues seem simple. Oh, well, we should not sell pot to kids, minors. Yeah. But then you get into okay, I'm going to avoid all of the bad puns. You get into the details of that, and it becomes much more difficult to navigate. So what I'd like to do now, and I know Matt's raised one issue, which is the facilities issue, but I've had communications, and I'm not going to force anyone into the public here who doesn't want to discuss issues that they've raised. But if any, I know that there is deep feeling on a couple of issues that we might be able to move with as a committee. So I'm just going to be silent and give people a chance to voice those issues that they might want to raise. Stuart,
So my proposal would be to look at after-school educational laboratories. There's often a gap between research and practice. In education, the obvious example recently in New York City is the belated recognition, with credit to David Banks, that phonics is more effective than whole language in teaching reading. But there's much more research to be done about education. And moreover, there's much more research that has been done and begs to be applied in the field. Now, it's not the place of a community board to suggest how the Department of Education run its schools. And in truth, I really do believe that David Banks is the first competent problem solver to run education in New York City. But the Department of Education should partner, I think, with independent programs to experiment and to demonstrate through evidence how to improve education. Schools themselves just aren't in a position to do this, to risk experimenting on live students. And, even failing schools don't want to be accused of treating the kids like guinea pigs. But a supplemental program, an educational laboratory, could do just that. It can be on a campus rather than affiliated with a particular school. And it could be recruited initially by the community from research institutions like universities, teachers' colleges, psychology, or neuroscience, neurobiology programs that have an emphasis on education, or whatever else makes sense. It can even be an auxiliary to whatever existing laboratory schools exist right now. It would, the programs themselves would be responsible for getting foundation grants or Department of Education funding, or money from university departments, whatever. I recognize it would have to be designed so that there's random selection, and there has to be some kind of independent judgment. So this is obviously an ambitious undertaking, but I think if we can recruit at least one or two sponsors to develop the concept, it seems practicable. For 150 years, people have been complaining about the quality of education in this country. We've had laboratory schools that demonstrated a lot of success often, yet for various reasons, they were never scaled up. Change is hard. So I would suggest that we start off with some offline conversations with people who studied education, academics and journalists, Diane Ravitch at NYU, Deborah Meyer, who founded the Central Park East School, or schools, E.D. Hirsch, who's a professor of education in Virginia, and so on. I mean, there are people with whom we could collect ideas and see if this seems viable. And I have taken up more than my allocation of time, so I'll stop there.
no, I would like to figure out how we could have a discussion like that, and so Stuart, would you be willing to identify, obviously this is for the fall, but you mentioned Ravitch and Meyer and Hirsch. I've heard, I certainly know, familiar with Ravitch and Hirsch. Let's figure out how we can engage with their thinking, and then see where it might intersect with what Chancellor Banks is trying to do, and figure a way to fit us as a community board, which is a unique entity, into that kind of discussion. I just don't want to shut down ideas of any sort. So if you could give a little time over that on that, and we could talk about it, before we get back together again in the fall, I'm very open to doing that. I mean, I think I don't know where it's going to go. It's like the school building issue. That's either going to be a huge 10-year, 8-year project that results in a major change to how the DOE does business, or it's not going to go anywhere. I don't know what's going to happen with it, but I don't mind positioning our committee a little bit as trying to think outside the box on some of these things. And if we do that on asylum seekers as well, I'm very open to this kind of, I'm always trying to figure out, where does a community board fit? We have 32 community education councils. We have half a dozen or so citywide education councils. We have CPAC, we have district presidents councils in every district. So where do we fit? And I'm very open to, and so far it's been school crossing guards and extra security guard at a front desk and a walk-up building, and which is very practical stuff that means something to the community. So let's figure out how we can move ahead on that. So Stuart, is that something you would think about, and I'd be happy to talk to you about as we move ahead?
I'm pretty sure that whenever I speak, I'm volunteering for something. So
How do you think I got here? Okay, all right.
I just want to emphasize, I think there needs to be something independent of the schools that works with the schools.
I like that.
That's why, and that's not a critique of our education department or teachers. I just think that there needs to be an entity that has a different sort of mandate and isn't as concerned about experimenting on live kids. So
if we're going to experiment on live kids, I certainly want professional educators either from Teachers College or somewhere like that involved, but I take your point, or a real teacher like Matt. Okay. All right. So okay. And now, Matt, I know that there are some things that you've already started to raise this evening that you would like to talk about.
Well, I was just indicating I do have my master's from Teachers College.
That's what I was thinking.
I fit that criteria, but the thing about mental health, I honestly think it is a much bigger problem across the board than cannabis in schools or cannabis with youth. And it's it was very frustrating to hear the level of specificity we are asking for in reporting with that, but not what is going on inside our schools, counselor to student ratios, what should even be an appropriate counselor to student ratio post-COVID. Has there been any discussion about increasing that ratio? I did talk to Kyle last week. He said this might be something under our purview. The SHOP DOE thing, where we are required as a school to use specific money for furniture, let's say, and we are not allowed to use that money for anything else, even if we don't have a need for more furniture. That is controlled by the mayor's office, since the DOE is under mayoral control, at least for the next year. And then there's also the fact that there's insanely inflated prices for the vendors that we need to use in SHOP DOE. One lap desk that I could find for $5 or $10 costs $150. And if the mayor, instead of maybe inflating our healthcare costs and screwing over our retirees, which he's doing, maybe we could talk about the vendors that are under the purview of the panel for educational policy, where the mayor gets to choose the majority, and they also
we have
contract.
I hear two things there. One is vendor selection, which is a big one, and anecdotally I like to tell the story of how we tried once to put in a washing machine in the school for homeless kids, bringing together several things here. And if you go through school facilities, you know, the cost of putting the thing in became quite prohibitive to where we just started giving out laundromat cards to the kids to use. So, yeah, so Shop DOE, which requires the schools to use certain vendors, which are priced in a way that seems high to me. That sounds like a subject that the community board might want to be interested in because it affects schools in our district directly. And then the whole mental health issue you raise is a broader issue. And you're right, we spent a lot of energy on cannabis because that, you know, it's where the heat was. So we would like to, would you be interested in sort of scoping out over the next, you know, short while, you know, how you would think about approaching those two specific issues? And you specifically referenced guidance counselor ratios, you know, which I assume includes social workers and the whole array of people who work in schools, and then how we might appropriately get involved in issues related to vendors and how ultimately it's PEP approves the contracts, how all of this gets done. And it could just be informative just to have it. I mean, I know someone, I'm pretty sure I could get someone from PEP to show up if we had a substantive discussion on that, you know, as long as they knew what was coming and it wasn't an ambush, you know, I think they would show up. Yeah. So would you be willing to scope those two things out? Okay. So we've got several issues here that, so we've got it. Yes, Abby.
I just want to throw out there, I think we should be focusing a little bit on 3K for all. Heard some rumblings over the last year that there was some issues with city payments to providers and not actually space for everybody who applied. So I think in the spirit of youth and education, if parents, you know, are being driven out of the city before their child reaches first grade or kindergarten, it's definitely an issue we should look at. Because I do think it was a really important initiative, and I want to see it succeed.
And ironically, it's how I got involved in the community board in the first place was when Mayor de Blasio started putting in pre-Ks. You know, he put them appropriately in neighborhoods that had historically been underserved, but our neighborhood didn't get a lot of them. And long story short, I helped Dan Garodnick and other council members get about 400 or 500 pre-K seats put into the district, and somehow got me on the community board. But I agree. I'm very concerned about what I've read about concerns about 3K. So we have 4 issues that we've identified here tonight. You know, clearly we have this ongoing issue with asylum seekers and homeless kids in our schools, which relates to, but is not identical with 3K for all, and how that gets what's happening in our that's a simple numbers matter to me in our district. You know, how many seats are we getting? How many we lost? You know, what is the demand? Those are all numbers we can get. Then issues that have been related to curriculum, where we would be breaking a lot of new ground, but that's fine with me. And then 2 other issues. One is vendors through PEP, and then the whole broader issue of mental health in our schools. I mean, those are 1, 2, 3. That's actually 5 fairly meaty issues. And you know, and I don't mind being a little iconoclastic on some of these, because these are issues that cut across. You know, I spent enough time on a school board to know, you know, that there are issues that that can engage everyone. And I think these are issues that can engage everyone without getting too, contentious, as it were, So let's, Aisha, have you caught most of this for the minutes? If you want me to help, make sure it gets captured, got it. Okay, we're not going to settle any of these issues here tonight, but to me, having 5 very specific issues that we're going to be looking at as a committee is what we should be doing. And even if only one of them has real legs and takes off, then we'll have made a contribution as a committee to kids in our schools. That would be meaningful. And does anyone else want to make a comment? I don't want to cut off discussion here at all, because I think my job here tonight was to listen, and there are 5 issues that have been identified. That will take some work to get moving. Any old or new business that people would like to raise, because we've raised a lot of new issues here. And I will, if we can get an organized discussion on vendors, I will try to get someone from PEP here, but we'd have to fully brief them beforehand so that they, as I said, they don't feel ambushed.
Yeah, John, I think what will be interesting to see, especially starting in the fall, to see how the mayor and the chancellor, how they implement the program for, I guess, what is it called? I think they're going more of like a Wilson type of style with teaching children how to read, as opposed to with the current style. So more of a focus on the phonics. And I think it will be interesting to see how it is implemented, to see if it's successful. I think because screening for dyslexia and challenge and addressing issues with reading is critical for how people succeed in life. The jobs they get, to keep people from committing crime. I know that statistically, I don't want to be absolutely incorrect here with some of the numbers, but I think maybe people who are incarcerated, maybe 60% or 70% may not have the skills, or they're not capable of reading. And so I really would like to see how that is implemented.
First of all, 2 things. First of all, right, and there was a study at Stanford a while ago that was a landmark study on this, which showed that the surest predictor of high school graduation rates was reading level by the time you hit 3rd grade. And cynically, some people who were trying to decide where, anecdotally, people who were trying to decide where to site future prisons looked at places where the failure of reaching appropriate reading levels by the 3rd grade were prevalent. So I'm hearing Neil Stewart volunteer to work with you on this subject, and that's terrific. Okay, any other comments, issues, questions, thoughts? That were over an hour, and I always do try to keep these meetings to an hour, but I'm happy. There's obviously going to be some follow-up on all of this. Okay, any other old or new business? And I can adjourn the meeting, but I would be happier if someone made a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Move to adjourn.
And it doesn't need a second, so we will adjourn. And thank you. And I very sincerely meant when I said that I want to let some of the thoughtful people on this committee run with a lot more next year. And I acknowledge that cannabis became, all the time, but that was beyond my control to some extent. You can get in political things, you get driven by external agendas. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. It was an important agenda, but it took on a bigger size. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Right.